Are you working on your author career but struggling to get that first book published? Does the goal of being an author seem too lofty? Or thoughts of having multiple books and making a full-time living are as fantastical as living in Cinderella's castle? Welcome to Discovered Wordsmiths, a podcast where aspiring authors can be heard. Join Stephen Schneider as he finds and talks to authors you may not know, but authors that have gotten their foot on the author career path. Hear what they've done to get there and where they want to go now. Settle back. It's time for a bit of inspiration and advice. Come listen to today's Discovered Wordsmith.
Welcome to another episode of Discovered Wordsmiths. We're in a new year and starting with some really great books. Here's the first nonfiction book of the year. It is written by Doug Knust. He runs a group called The Explorers, which is a group for boys. And he wrote a book called Man Stuff, which has lessons he's taught to those boys as they grow up to be men. And he's been doing this for many years. So sit back. Check out Man Stuff. I had a really good time talking with Doug about it. And if you like the podcast, get his book, give us some likes, pass it on to a friend. I hope people are finding books that they like to read. And here's Doug. Well, Doug, welcome to the podcast, and thank you for taking some time to talk to me today.
Well, thank you, Stephen. I feel privileged to be able to visit with you.
Great. Well, I'm excited. First of all, before we start talking about the book, tell us a little bit about you, who you are, where you're from, some of the things you like to do besides writing.
Okay, well, I'm a car dealer, Stephen. I'm a small town car dealer. I have a small Ford dealership in Winter, South Dakota. I live in Chamberlain. I used to have another dealership here in Chamberlain. I got a couple of Napa auto parts stores, got some real estate interests and whatnot. So I would consider myself a small town businessman. Some of the things that I like to do. I like to golf. I like to sail. I like to hunt. I like to ride bike. I enjoy volunteering and working with young men.
Wow, that's great. And that we're going to talk a little bit about is what helped inspire your writing.
Yes.
So that kind of leads into it. What got you to finally say, hey, I want to write and start writing?
Well, I have had a blog probably for, I don't know, 10, 12 years. And it's kind of, Stephen, it's kind of a place where I went to blow off steam. If I had a little frustration, I would go and voice my opinion there. If I wanted to relax a little bit, I'd go tell a childhood story or some experience that happened to me. And I found that to be somewhat therapeutic. That combined with the fact that in 2001, when my son was in seventh grade, I started a middle school boys service club. And the idea behind that was to give these young guys an opportunity to be on a team, even if they weren't athletic. Some of them were great athletes. Some of them had not a lot of athletic talent. But I felt like it's important that these kids had a chance to be on some kind of a winning team. And so we would have our meetings every morning, Thursday morning at 7:30 before school, which is pretty early if you're a middle school boy. When I say middle school, I'm talking 6th, 7th, and 8th grade boys. And so we would have our meetings at 7:30 every morning and discuss the activities, how they were going to raise some money or somebody that needed some help and whatnot. Well, sometime after 2011, I don't remember exactly when it was, I introduced this little segment to our half-hour meetings called Man Stuff. And first it started about 5 minutes long, and it grew to about 10 minutes long. And in this little segment, I would just kind of go over something that I felt, was a skill or something that a young man really needed to know to be successful. And, everything from shaking hands to how to introduce yourself and whatnot. And the boys Steve and the boys loved it. They just like, it got to be like when they showed up at the meeting, it's like, what's the man stuff today? What are we doing for man stuff? And so, over the course of the meetings, I tried to have enough man stuff lessons so I wasn't repeating the same thing every year. So it took 3 years worth of man stuff lessons because that would give them a chance to cycle through the 3 years that they were in the club. Well, 4 or 5 years ago, I started having some parents that were like really encouraging me to, to maybe commit some of these man stuff lessons to a book. And, I don't consider myself an author. I never considered myself an author, but I did have all these notes that I had kept and used to present the man stuff segment at each of these meetings. And, I sold one of my car dealerships, and I found myself with a little bit more time. And I started thinking about, every year when the eighth graders in my organization move on, they graduate from eighth grade or move on to high school. I presented them with a book, and I always tried to present them with a book that was either some type of inspirational or motivational, or I found a few books that were just kind of related to this man stuff that I would give to each of them, write a little personal inscription in each of them, congratulating them and thanking them and whatnot. And I thought, well, wouldn't it be cool if I could give each of these boys a book that I had written with their help that kind of would remind them of some of these lessons. And so it was, about a year ago, a little more than a year ago, I said, all right, I'm going to try to do this. I'm going to try to take these notes that I have and somehow put them together into the form of a book. And then, of course, COVID hit. And I found myself with a little bit more time, and this was just kind of a natural thing that kind of helped me. I had started, but the COVID really, kind of poured the gas on the fire, and it allowed me to kind of organize my notes and kind of assemble them into the form of a book. And so that's how the book came about.
I love this, and I swear the story, it sounds like it could be a movie, Doug. I mean, picture. Have you ever heard of the old movie "Follow Me, Boys"? It's about Boy Scouts essentially.
No.
It had. Oh, I can't remember his name. There was a really, at the time, popular actor in it. Was in a lot of Disney stuff. But "Follow Me, Boys" sounds like your story.
Sounds like something I should look up and watch.
Yes, actually, you should. I would recommend it. It's a scoutmaster who spends his whole life helping these boys as they grow up, and and when he gets in trouble when he's older and he feels like, oh, nobody can help me, it's like all these young men show up to help him because they were all the young men he helped out.
Sure.
The ones who gave a chance.
Sure.
I mean, I'm sitting here going, wow, that sounds just like it. You should look it up. That
I will. I'm making a note to do that.
So you wrote down all these things, and I think this is a skill that's needed in today's world. I was just talking about going to show my stepson how to tell tire pressure and fill up a tire without using a thing. So you wrote down all these things, and you had enough of them for 3 years worth, and you said the boys were really receptive. It sounds like writing the book is just trying to reach a larger audience for you.
Well, it isn't even that, Stephen. I got to tell you that I have been amazed at how people have embraced this book, because I literally, as I was putting the book together, I was thinking, I listed in the back of my book, I listed the 380 some young men who had gone through the Explorers. That's the name of this group, had gone through the program. And kind of as an acknowledgement that they helped me write the book. And my hope was that I could get a copy of the book in every one of their hands, and I'd have something to go forward and to give to these young guys as they finish the program going forward. And I really never even thought about the idea of marketing the book to the public. And got some encouragement as I was doing this, and so that's it. It just kind of took off from there.
That's actually makes it even better because you weren't thinking commercial, you weren't thinking making money, but the need is there, and I think the audience in that type of thing is really out there. I think there's a lot more people with the same type of thing that in today's world it's almost confusing. I remember back in the 80s, it's like, oh, I'm a 80s man, I cry, that type
Right.
of
Right.
sentiment,
Yeah.
and we've lost a little bit of the hunter gatherer, the manliness thing.
Oh,
And I
yeah.
think sometimes that still is a needed thing in the world. I think a lot of young boys grown into men, they still feel kind of confused. I'm not saying it, we have to go to completely separate gender roles and, I'm a man. Ooh, look at me roar. But, our culture used to have very set things, the man did this, the woman did this. And I think sometimes that helps with identity itself and helps with self-confidence.
We send very confusing mixed messages to not just young men, to young ladies as well.
Yes.
And I have 34 years of teaching religious education classes in my background as well. Most of it, probably more than 25 years of it, is teaching the Ten Commandments to eighth grade boys. And so, and my goal when I do that is simply to take the Ten Commandments, which were written, over 5,000 years ago, and try to put it in today's American culture. And believe it or not, they are still very pertinent. But, when you start teaching the Ten Commandments, you realize the mixed messages that we send to kids. And it's that masculinity thing, this toxic masculinity term just drives me crazy. I don't want to get too far off into the weeds on that, but suffice it to say that a lot of young boys are confused, and it's not their fault. It's the message that we're sending them that confuses them.
I agree. And I think it's great. It's almost making it a little more black and white, easier to understand, having a book. And, these are lessons men should learn about. I mean, little things like, should I hold this door open for this lady, or is she go yell at me because she's a strong, independent woman and can do it herself?
Well,
And I say that because I've actually had a lady yell at me about that, and I was so confused.
And there's a chapter in my book about hold the door.
Really?
So you've nailed it. Yeah. In my book, I've broken it down. There's, I think, 36 chapters, 34 chapters, but there's 7 different sections. One's on relationships and stuff. And it's essentially dealing with people, how to introduce yourself, shaking hands, looking people in the eye, how to help people. Just, the bro hug, one of them's called the bro hug. And the interesting thing about this particular segment is I had to kind of rearrange and change things a little bit because of COVID, because I don't know if the handshake will ever have the prominent role in our culture that it did prior to COVID. But I do think a lot of the things that we get from a handshake will somehow have to be conveyed. So it has a place, but I de-emphasized it a little bit because of the COVID. But then I have a section on manners and stuff. I have a section on your body and stuff. I have a section on skills and stuff. That's like, how to tell a joke, how to cook a signature dish, how to assemble some quality tools for a lifetime. Then I have a section on leadership and stuff. I have a section on digital stuff where I talk a little bit about the online social media, some of that kind of stuff. And then finally, clothing and stuff. So those are kind of the sections of the book. And, each one of them kind of has its own pertinence to today's young man.
I love that. I think it's great because, like I mentioned, we could talk about this more in the next section. I was involved with Scouts as an adult, and I saw a definite need for something like that because it's different than it used to be. We'll get into more things like that on the next part of the whole talk here.
Sure.
Did you publish this yourself, or did you get an agent with a publisher?
As you can probably imagine by hearing the backstory, Stephen, I took the shortcut. Okay, so to start with, my daughter, who does it for a living, and she's not a professional editor, but she does a lot of writing for a living. She was my editor. I'm grateful to the work that she did on my book. I think she did a marvelous job with the editing. I have a son who is a graphic artist, and he designed the cover and the back cover for me. And I took the path of least resistance. I have a few regrets along the way because of that, but I just self-published on Amazon, the Kindle Direct Publishing. And my goal was to get the book out as soon as I could so that I could give it to my eighth graders as they moved on to high school. So once I got a little momentum, I wanted to get the book out.
Okay. And I don't think self-publishing is necessarily a shortcut, because there's still a lot of work you have to do. And it sounds like you were trying to make the book look like any book you'd see in the bookstore.
Yeah, I'm very proud of the final product. I went into it knowing nothing. I learned a lot along the way. When I say that I have some regrets, I kind of wish that I would have maybe had a publisher so I could go to some of the bookstores and present my book and, tell them how they can get it and whatnot. And of course, when you're with Amazon, you're kind of stuck with Amazon unless you kind of hit the do-over switch,
Right. And that was actually going to be my next question. What were some lessons you learned writing this book? And if you wrote another book, what you would do different? So do you think if you wrote some other book connected to this or not, you would look at an agent, a publisher, or what would you do different?
I think I would self-publish again. I just am not sure. Let me just step up a level. As I said, I'm a small town businessman, and quite frankly, the Amazons of the world are like direct threats to the people who run businesses in my community, right? The whole online commerce thing is. And so I don't necessarily want to be that online guy. The flip side of that is, somehow you got to get, if you're going to try to sell the book to the public, somehow you have to do that, right? But I would like to be able to support the small businesses and be able to offer my product through them. And so, I would probably self-publish, but I do it in a manner where I control the distribution, whereas I really don't when I do it with Amazon. I mean, Amazon controls the distribution. I'd like to be able to offer, if I had a second book, if you bought the two of them, maybe there'd be something thrown in, or we'd give, I'm a marketing guy. I mean, I'm a car dealer, right? So I see lots of different ways of doing it, and Amazon pretty much steals your ability to do any of that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I totally agree. We could probably have a whole discussion on
there's probably several podcasts just in that topic right there. But
right.
but I will say that my goal when I went into this was to have a book that I could give to these young guys, not only the ones that were in the program, but the ones that have been through the program. And so that was the easiest way to get that done. Now I see that there is probably not only a market, but a need for the message that I'm trying to convey. And there's probably a better way to get it out.
Okay. So you've had some feedback, and a lot of people encouraging you, and a lot of the boys obviously helped shape the whole book through the years. Right. What are some people saying that didn't know you or that weren't one of the boys? What type of feedback are you getting from people that are seeing the book and discovering it?
The comment that I've gotten several times and has just probably really impacted me the most is the one that says, I wish there was a book like this when I was growing up.
Nice.
And that one just hits me right in the heart, because that's kind of what I want. And I have, the book is written in a very conversational style, and it's a conversation, Stephen, that's not for an adult per se, but for an eighth grader. Okay. And of course, that that makes it, I believe, a little more inviting to most adults because oftentimes books are written so that they're a challenge to read. I think everybody will find this a really simple read. And that's not to say it's a simple message. It's just an easy read because
Right.
I wrote it as if I was conversing with the young men that I work with.
Well,
And
some of the most popular books are young adult type books, but they're read by 30 and 40-year-olds. So
yeah,
you hit
exactly.
that on the head right there.
Yes. And so I, even though I wrote it for the young men and the message, that's my intended reader, I'm finding that my market is there's three segments of my market. The most active one is grandparents, you know, and that's very rewarding. As somebody who's a new grandparent myself, it's really nice to see grandparents looking out for their young grandsons, trying to help them. The second one is, and the one that I need to do a better job at tapping, is the single mother, the mother who's raising a son and doesn't have a male role model in the picture, and they have an incredibly difficult job, just making sure that they keep that young guy on the right path, let alone trying to teach some of these lessons that nobody ever taught them in the first place, right? Because they were young ladies. And so I'm trying to find a better way to market to that segment. And then I have the young men, and honestly, young men don't buy books for themselves.
Right.
It's usually a gift, you know. And so that's my ultimate market, but it's usually some kind of a trickle through to get it to them.
Maybe for the second half marketing, that's a little something to talk about because I've got kind of the same boat. I write middle grade fantasy, and you can't really market to the eighth grader. You have to market to the parents, but the parents aren't the ones reading it. So maybe we'll touch on that a little bit more.
I'm trying to figure out how to get a pop-up ad on a video game. I think that would be the way that I'd market to those young guys.
Yeah. Well, you need to start putting like a copy of your book in the back seat of all the cars when people test drive them, family
there,
cars.
there you go.
Uh, So, Doug, you're a businessman first, and it's interesting that you're a Ford dealer because I made the comment that I haven't seen a whole lot of Ford dealers around Northeast Ohio as much as I used to. It just seems there's less of them for some reason. But do you have plans for a next book? Do you want to write more?
I have not only the chapters that I didn't include in the first book. I kind of took the ones that, like, to me seemed like the most logical first step. But I hit about half of what I had. I've had literally 20 to 25 suggested topics, some of which are just like, why didn't I think of that? That was, I totally left it out. When people read the book, I've been very rewarded by the fact that they feel like, well, you do a good job of telling somebody how to do this, you know? And so, there may be a man stuff 2.0, more things a young man needs to know. I'd like to do that, Stephen, but I can't say for sure that there will be, because
Well,
again, I'm not an author. I'm a guy that wrote a book. I'm a car dealer, small business guy. You know what I mean?
which actually I love because it kind of shows today's world. You can write a book, you can get it out there, and people can love it and appreciate it, even if 30, 40 years ago, the publishers wouldn't have touched it.
Right.
And that's an important thing, especially for a book like this.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And it may be why so many people say, I wish there was a book like this when I was younger, because the publishers just never picked it up and ran with it, you know?
Right. Well, I do know, I remember getting my kids a set of books, Dangerous Book for Boys and Dangerous Book for Girls. And it was not quite the same, not like lessons, but things like things little boys do and things little girls do, split it up. But the funny thing is, a lot of them were the same thing in the two
Sure.
books.
Sure.
So I don't know, since you're not an author first in your heart, do you read much? Do you have any favorite books and authors?
I love to read. I travel. I live 60 miles from one of my stores and 100 miles from another one of my stores. So I get plenty of windshield time in. I do a lot of audiobooks. I love motivational, inspirational books. Malcolm Gladwell. I love Malcolm Gladwell. I just think he's got a great way of taking kind of difficult research and putting it in Main Street language. And then I like to do a little fiction. I like Michael Connelly. I like John Grisham. I have a pretty long list of authors that I like. I do listen to 35, 40 books a year. So.
Wow. Nice. Okay. So do you have a section in your book on books that boys should read?
I don't have it specifically books that boys should read. In my chapter on leadership, I give 10 titles that I think are great books on leadership, but you've just made a wonderful suggestion for another chapter in a next book, if there is one.
Oh, well, there are definitely books I remember reading growing up, and a lot of them, things like Huckleberry Finn and Tom Sawyer, which aren't as relevant to today's youth, but I think the sense of adventure and the just being a kid, especially, Tom Sawyer, he just loved
coming of age. Just,
yes. I think,
and I have to tell you, I just finished a book yesterday called This Tender Land, and I can't even remember the author's name off the top of my head. Just a great, it was literally almost like an extension of Huck Finn. It was a great book, and I love those coming of age type books. Stephen King's Stand By Me is one of my.
I was just going to mention that. You read my mind.
That's one of my favorite books. I just, it's the things that young boys do. They like to go out and discover and whatnot, and the adventures of a young man are just. Those are stories I love.
So the 10 books under leadership, what were some of those?
I know I got Dale Carnegie is in there. 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, Stephen Covey. Developing the Leader Within You, John C. Maxwell. Extreme Ownership, How the U.S. Navy SEALs Lead and Win. Leaders Eat Last, Simon Sinek. Good to Great by Jim Collins. Principle-Centered Leadership, Stephen Covey. The Art of War. How to Win Friends and Influence People. Wooden on Leadership by John Wooden and Stephen Jameson. And Drive, The Surprising Truth About What Motivates Us by Daniel Pink. I do enjoy Daniel Pink's books as well. He's got an interesting way of taking just a lot of research and making it interesting and something that it can be easy reading.
Nice. Yeah, that's a pretty good list. I'll make sure to include some links to those books in the podcast episode.
Great.
And you are a small town businessman. Do you have any local bookstores that you like to go to?
A community of 2,500 I live in. I've got businesses in a community of 1,200 and 3,500. And unfortunately, there are no dedicated bookstores per se. There are some kind of neat little shops that I have been able to get my book into, but there's not really any place where you could just, go and pick out a book. Now, our community is fortunate to have a real nice library, and so I think that helps to replace that lack of a bookstore a little bit. But yeah, it's just really tough in a small community to generate enough income with books,
Yep. So this would be a great way to close this part of the podcast. But do you have any words of advice for any boys that might be listening that are thinking of writing a book?
Well, the first one would be just commit to it. I messed around for 4 or 5 years, kind of thinking in my mind how I would organize it, what I would do. I had already done all the work, but once I committed to it, it seems like, it reminds me of that old saying, how do you eat an elephant one bite at a time? And once I committed to it, it wasn't that difficult. Every Tuesday I'd sit down for a couple hours and I'd work on it. And pretty soon I had the bulk of the work done. I've heard some of your other guests say this, and I really think it's true, and that is to just write about what you love. Follow your passion. For me, working with young men has been a passion going back to high school. I coached little league teams in high school, and so that's been a passion of mine. So it's been real easy to write about that. And then once you have a book, take a little extra time before you dive in. I wish I would have done that. I wish I'd have done a little pre-marketing. I wish I would have looked into the options I had for publication and promotion and some of that kind of stuff. And I think if you do that, it gives you a chance to make the best decision for the book or the product that you write.
Great. Well, thank you, Doug. I appreciate you taking some time to talk to us about your book today, and we'll continue on in a moment with the second half for writers.
Sounds good. Thanks, Stephen.
Thanks, Doug.
Thank you for listening to Discovered Wordsmiths. Come back next week and listen to another author discuss the road they've traveled, and maybe, sometime in the near future, it might be you.